I'm here today with Dave Schneider. It's August 23rd, 2006 at 6:30 p.m. and we're at his home at 173 Thurman Avenue in Columbus. Would you state your name, please?
David Schneider.
And what is your ethnic or racial background?
Caucasian, a mix of German and Irish.
All right. And where did you grow up?
I'm from Zanesville, Ohio, and I grew up there. Did stay there until I left to go to college.
And what year were you born?
1938.
Okay. And do you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a brother and I had a sister. Both are deceased.
All right. And what is your earliest memory?
That's a good question. I don't know. I family affairs of sorts, picnics and things like that. That's a really tough one to pull out of the hat. Most of them were family-oriented type things, and I came from my parents were both from fairly large families and had lots of cousins. We were the city kids. Most of our cousins lived in the rural area of Muskingum and Perry counties. So I loved going out there, and I loved coming to the city. So that was great.
All right. Where did you go to elementary school at?
In Zanesville, Wilson Elementary School, and it was about 6 blocks from where I lived. I never knew what a school bus was, so I did a lot of walking on it.
And where did you go to junior high school at?
Right next door at Grover Cleveland Junior High School.
And high school?
Went to 2 high schools. I went to Irish High School, which was downtown in Zanesville. I'd been there for years. My father went there, but they decided on a new school. So I graduated from a new high school in Zanesville in 1955. First class out of there. And by the way, they're getting ready to tear that high school down.
When you were growing up, when you were still living at home, who were your heroes?
I guess I was into the movies and that sort of thing, so I had a lot. I was a Western fan, and the movie stars were my heroes, so to speak. Within the real world, though, I would have to say my parents and a couple of teachers along the way, perhaps.
How old were you when you first realized that you might be different than the other kids?
I don't think that really came until late in life, or later, maybe in late high school years. I think a lot of other people knew that I was different long before that. I was quite a gregarious child and an entertainer. Ran around acting up all the time, and great for costuming and doing little plays and pretending like I could play the piano and that sort of thing. I guess it wasn't really until in high school that I began to notice myself being a little different, but still thought it was something that I might outgrow. I did find myself interested in people of the same sex, and began to admire some of my fellow classmates. And it was kind of weird to me. I dated a lot. I had a great time. I had many girlfriends, and was fine that way. I was a very, very social person. I was also a school photographer, so I had a chance to take pictures of a lot of my classmates and things, and I really enjoyed that. And I found myself attracted to a couple of the guys and really enjoyed when I knew I was going to have to take their picture and things like that. But then I had some sexual experiences as a youngster, the exploratory type, and I never took that too seriously. I just thought that was just something everybody did. In fact, I had heard that, I suppose, or read it at some point along the way. And then I kind of dismissed it that way. When I got to college, I dated. I had lived in a dorm with a bunch of guys that I really liked. And I think it's kind of interesting that those people that I was closest with now, I found out later, were gay. And but I never thought of myself as gay. And no, never had. I mean, it's hard to say, but it's true that my experiences were sexual, and they were usually one way. I thought of that. Now I think that's pretty bad, but back then that's just the way it was. And I never thought about being interested in another person that way myself as the other end. And one time there was a very handsome young man that used to wink at me, and it used to bother me something terrible. And he made an approach to me, and I was just pretty much horrified because I thought, whoa, because I half wanted to do it at that point. And so...
This was when you were in college?
Yes, towards the end. And I had one roommate that one time chased me around the room saying he wanted to kiss me. Well, those were things that you kind of laugh about at the time, and ho, ho, ho. And then I met a young man who was older than I was, had been in the service. It was during my last year of college. And he used to go out and with the girls, but he would never make dates ahead of time. And he would talk about them being a good lay and so forth, and all those things that young guys tend to do. But I would just get really mad at him, just furious. And I'd say, well, why do you do that? That's not right. You're supposed to do that when you're married, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, he said, men like this kind of stuff too. And he started to tell me about his days in the service in Washington, D.C., how he had been a hustler and had sold himself to men in Washington, D.C. Well, that just petrified me, and I just didn't know what to think, but I still considered him a really good friend, and I was just bothered by all that. And he told me how he met these men in bars and so forth, and I thought, oh, that's pretty different. And at the time, I think at times I thought it was bad. But I was going for my first job interview when I was a senior. And I had to go from Athens to Dayton, Ohio. And I got a ride as far as Dayton. And then I stayed overnight in Dayton and had a bus that took me to the town where my job interview was. But that night, I went out to get a drink. I walked into this bar and sat down, and all of a sudden I noticed that there was all men. And there was a piano player and so forth. And I thought, oh my goodness, this must be one of those places Al was talking about. I did not leave. But and I was approached by another guy, and we ended up being together. That was my first experience in that type of contact. He actually stayed overnight with me at the hotel. And then, of course, the next day, I guess I was filled with guilt. I had a job interview, and I thought, I'll never get this job. But I went on for the interview, and I did well, and I did get that job. Well, when I moved there, the first thing I did was when I had some time on my own, I went to Dayton. And that, I guess, became my first encounters where I wanted to know the people and that sort of thing. And it was still, of course, quite a problem because it was so taboo. And my family, I think at the time, probably, as I said, everybody knew but me. And but I couldn't talk to anybody. I wouldn't talk to anybody about it. I did not come out to my family, even till the end. My parents, it was never an open thing. It was just a thing that we knew, but we didn't talk about it. And I was in that job for 2 years and was drafted and went in the service. And I've been pretty active both in Cincinnati and Dayton. I knew all the bars that were existing at that time, and had also knew some of the bars here in Columbus, because I've traveled everywhere I've lived. I had to travel through Columbus to get home. But I never had any real experiences in Columbus during that time. But I went to the service, and the service was I some of the gay people I talked to said, "Well, be careful on this and that," because it, can really change your life if you get caught and so forth. Well, I was pretty cautious at first, and then I found a bar that I really liked, and I went to it a lot, and I met a lot of civilian people. And then I met...
Where were you stationed at?
Oh, excuse me, Fort Sam Houston.
All right.
In San Antonio, Texas. The base was right in the middle of the city. So it was and I had actually a 9-to-5 job. And I was on my own, it wasn't like being in an army camp where you had no place to go or couldn't leave the base. So it's just really like being a civilian, except the pay was pretty low. And I would go into town quite often, a lot of friends. And then I met a friend of mine in the barracks. Became acquainted, and we talked, but we never really ran around together. We would maybe have a cup of coffee or beer together, sometimes, usually on the base, but we didn't really run in the same crowd. And then he introduced me to another guy from the base. And then I met a guy who was really great. And we had a really good relationship. And in fact, I was in the process of this. Before I met him, I had met a couple of guys that lived together as a couple. And that was my first experience with that.
And about what year are we talking about?
That would have been in 1961. That was a new experience. And they were great. They would have me out for dinner, and they'd have parties, and I was always invited. And I met several people through that, but a lot ended up having, that's how I had my civilian friends. So then I met the guy in the military, and we became quite involved. The friend I mentioned earlier from the barracks got himself into trouble with a person who had gone to the army and had told him all about himself and had come out to them. And of course, that set off an investigation. And in the process of that investigation, I was interrogated. But they had me mixed up with another person, and so none of the information they had that they were questioning about meant much to me, except a name. One of my friend's name was Tom, and the person that they were investigating, his name was also Tom. So they would make references to what Tom had done, and it didn't compute, and so I didn't have to really lie or anything, because all this situation was just a fishing expedition, really, with me. But indeed, it did change my life because it was a really dreadful experience, sort of like the things you see in the old movies with the interrogation, with a light shining in your face and people sitting at a desk in front of you that you could only see silhouettes of, and making accusations and inquiries and so forth. They took me back to my barracks, and there were 2 or 3 guys in the barracks, and they went through all my personal effects, asked me about this letter, that letter, this picture, that picture, went through pockets of my clothing, and it was just unbelievable experience. But my boss at that time was a really great guy, and he had told me they were coming, and so he didn't tell me who, but he said it's going to be pretty rough and difficult, but stand your ground and do the best you can with them, and it'll be okay. He said, you're a good soldier, and I have no problems with you, and he said, and of course, your personal life is your personal life as far as I'm concerned. But he said, just be careful. So he was really on my side, and he was a big support after it was over. Treated me like basically I was somebody special. But I had no problems with the guys in the barracks. It was truly amazing. I expected to be kind of an outcast after that, and I never was. I went on to be promoted. Had been drafted, so I'd gone to Spec 4 rank, which was about what the normal person that's drafted at those times would do during a 2-year span. But then I went on and became a specialist 5th class and was promoted after all this derogation and everything, partly because of my boss pushed me to do it. I lost my friend because he was an officer and I was enlisted, and they were really after him, and also the general's aide at the base at that time. He had been involved with another person before me, and I didn't even know about it, but that was one of the people that had problems and was put out of the service too. All these people, by the way, disappeared overnight. I had a phone call from my friend from the barracks, and that was the last I ever heard from him. So it was just like, not only did all this go on, but the people you knew were gone. Tom did call me and tell me that he had resigned for the good of the service, and he would be in San Antonio for a while, but not to try to contact him. As it turned out, for my own welfare, he said. Turned out he had taken a job in this bar that I used to go to, playing the organ. And he was an entertainer there. And his profession was nursing, and he had to make a transition, and he wasn't sure whether he was going to get his license or what was going to happen to him. But he lost everything, his retirement and all. We did talk a couple of times, and then one time we had a very, very wonderful day. He said after that he did not want me to jeopardize any further in it. He did not want to see me. I would spend a lot of time with my friends off base, and they helped me survive. And I remember one night being held almost all night in the middle of the living room floor. When it came time to leave, I was going to stay in San Antonio because I did have really good friends there. And I was looking for a job in the newspaper business. And there were 2 newspapers there, but the pay was just terrible. And I got this call from my old boss here, and said, "Isn't it about time for you to be coming home?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we want you to come back." And I did. So I went back to Lebanon, Ohio. And I stayed there for quite a while. I was traveling, of course, through Columbus. I did have a friend in Cincinnati for several years. We were had a long-term relationship. And when that ended, Columbus sort of became in the pictures, and that would have been in the early 70s, I believe. And I met my first partner in Columbus at the Clock restaurant. The Clock at that time was a mixed bag. It was the front part of it, the restaurant, was a bar, and the middle part was like a blue plate special diner area, and the back was a nicer eating area. And they had a lounge back there. And I met Richard there, and we were together for almost 13 years. He'd left, we were living in Marion, and he left to go to Michigan for a job. And we had a long-distance relationship for a while. And as those things go, it eventually faded, and it was a very difficult relationship primarily because of the distance, and the effort to remain monogamous was very difficult. I did go to the bars in Columbus, and that's when my first bar was the original Trade Winds. First bar I was ever in Columbus. And I went in the front door, which was unheard of. I didn't know. And then somebody told me that, well, there's an awning out there and there's a light under it. But they didn't tell me that you had to go around to the back of the building to go in. Well,
Where was Trademans located?
This is where the convention center is now, by the area of the York train station. It was not nationwide territory then. It was very dark. The train station was had like storefronts along the high street side, and it would have been to the south of that area. If I could really pick the area, I would say maybe it's close to the Hyatt Regency in that area, but I'm not positive. And so that first time there, I was very suspect. Nobody came in that front door, so they knew that I was the new guy in town. But Columbus was not a real friendly bar town. They had really strange liquor laws in Columbus, and the police were they were harassing type sometimes, not all the time, but I think they were probably paid off. But they had to do their little show. I don't know that to be a fact, but I do know that people did have bad experiences with the police and all. And so,
what do you mean by strange liquor laws?
Oh, the way they would do, where they could harass the bars was like you had to sit at the bar or you had to be seated to be served. You could not, today people wouldn't know how to react because you have to stay in one place all the time. You went in and you sat at the bar, you were served. And if you wanted to talk to somebody, you wouldn't dare take a drink over to their table. You would walk over to their table and maybe talk to them. If you wanted to stay there, then the booze would have to be brought to you. It was just those kind of, and that is strange by today's standards, maybe not back then. They used the liquor laws to, I think, in essence, harass the gay bars back then.
What was the interior of Trademans like?
I'm trying
your
to draw a
recollection
picture.
of the first time you went there.
As I recall, there was a bar along the one wall. If you were in from the front, probably on the left, and then a row of tables on the side.
And this would have been the 1970s?
Could be a little more later than that. I graduated in '59. I don't remember much about a gay bar in Columbus during that period in the '60s. It could have been possibly the late '60s. The bars that I was in Columbus were like I said, the Clock was there, and that was a place where gay people would meet be in there amongst everybody else. And there was a bar in the basement of the Dessler Hilton that I met some gay people in one evening. And you'll meet them in regular bars more so today because, everybody goes, usually if they want to be around a gay crowd, they go to a gay bar. But back then you would go to regular bars and see if there were gay people in there. So back to the trade. It was not a bright bar, as I recall. I've had pictures of dark images of the bar, and that was my first bar. It was the people who went there it's a nice bar, but it was not anything. The young people today would think it was boring. I'm sure.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, they have a lot of music, they have dancing. They're free to roam around to talk, and it's more of a general social atmosphere rather than talking to the person next to you or being there with a few friends. The bars got better. I remember the first dance bar that I went to in Columbus was the old Kit Kat, and it was where the Flatiron Building is. And the bar, the little teeny dance floor was at one end of the bar. But it was very popular. I didn't go to the one that's now the Eagle because I was told it was dangerous. There had been problems with fights and so forth. Then I once went to a bar out east, close to Bexley, and it was hard to get into. And I don't know, I wasn't that adventurous. I went in the first time, but I didn't like the anxiety associated with getting into it.
What made it difficult to get into?
Well, you had to show ID and you had to wait outside and that sort of thing.
Where was this located at?
It was on East Main Street, out by Bexley, sort of like this side of the tracks from Bexley. But I can't tell you exactly. It was like in a warehouse type building. And then, of course, everybody's favorite from my generation would probably been the Grotto, and that changed the whole bar scene in Columbus. It was very popular. They had the Sunday afternoon, barbecue and beer, and they had an outside patio, and it was fun. In a very, very similar to what we have today.
A couple of questions about some things that you already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You said when you were talking about when you first realized that you were gay, you said you thought other people knew it before you did.
Well, I think, yeah.
Well, what led you to believe other people knew it, or how do you think they figured that out?
It's kind of a retrospective thing. In some ways, I was associated, although I didn't play sports, but it was not because I didn't want to. It was because I was such small in stature, and my parents started me in school, and I just never caught up until I was older. So I was afraid of a ball. My father was good about it. He would still pitch the ball to me and everything, and he worked with me. But I think he kind of gave up and knew that I was going to be the sports person. He was always very supportive. I think probably that my two parents, I could have gone to him with anything. My mother I could have gone to with any problem. But I would have gone through a lot to do so. She's a very excitable person, but both of them had a lot of gay friends. My mother was a nurse. Her bridge club had 3 lesbians that I know of. My father was a supervisor.
This was in Zanesville?
Yeah. And 2 of them lived together, and the other one, there was little doubt in most people's mind, but even as a youngster, I thought she was pretty manly. But it was a really sweet person in a way. Just her demeanor was masculine. And my father was a supervisor at the post office. And I do remember vague conversations that he had about one of his friends there who was openly gay. And that was pretty dramatic in Zanesville. And so he was criticized a lot. And my father would get so angry because he said, it doesn't have anything to do with his work. It doesn't have, the man knows his job well, he does it well, and you can depend on him. So what makes a difference what he does when he's not at the office?
That's pretty progressive.
He said, my parents are very liberal in a way, except one time when I told you I was on the school newspaper, one of my father's classmates was gay, and he was a city official. I was to take pictures of the kids that had been elected to the city offices for the day, and my mother said, do you have to go to the city attorney's office? I said, oh, yes, I have to go to all of them, take a picture of each kid that won an election and so forth. And she said, well, you just watch yourself when you're in that office. And I said, why? She said, he likes young men. And so I thought, well, But I was not afraid of it or anything. I thought that was all very strange. And so what if he liked young men? I didn't understand the whole thing, the message. She had a tendency to give you information, but not enough, just to make you wonder. And then as a child or as a young person, I didn't question her that much. And as she was never kind to people I brought home. And I always felt sad about that because I had some friends that were, after I was living a gay lifestyle, that I took home, and she was not nice to them. And when she was dying, my first partner was ill. My first long-term, the one that and he had moved back to Ohio, and he had bladder cancer, and it had spread. And when I was living away from both of them, but I didn't have to, but I was taking care of Richard, because that was when he was ill, when he finally said, it's over and you need to go on with your life and all this sort of stuff. So, but I said, I will make sure that you're okay and taken care of. He said, that's great. But he said, your life is going to go on. And it is, but anyway, when I would go to see him, my mother would say, but I'm sicker. Not in so many words. And when I would say to him that I was going to see her, he would say, but I need your help. It was something else. But I was always sad that she was not real friendly with my friends. Because she did. Her girlfriends, why, they would party all the time. The bridge club was a big social thing. And never bothered her a bit about the women in the club. And she liked Dad's friend. But I think there was just this sad thing that they did not really want it to be that way. And I'm going to jump back to your original question about how do I think people knew when Steve and I first started seeing my family. It was like they were relieved that I was, with somebody, and they loved him. He is very much accepted by all of the family that I have left, and my brother was really good to him. We were really good friends. But it's just like all of a sudden they realized that my life was full. I have one cousin here in Columbus that said to me, "Oh my goodness, where did you find him?" She said, "You better hang on to him." So the coming out process is not always one where you have to make a big banner or whatever. And I think it's wonderful that in today's society, the kids are not without problems, but at least they're familiar with what's going on, what it might mean to them, and they see other people that are gay in normal situations, not in a bar or not in a restroom or wherever.
Where was it that you went to college at?
Athens University.
And what was your degree?
I have a journalism degree.
All right. And you attended there from what year to what year?
55 to 59.
All right. And it was while you were at Ohio University that you started consciously exploring the idea of being gay?
Yes.
All right.
It was, but no, that's hard to say. I began to realize, it's like my one friend that was so promiscuous and had been a hustler. Every now and then I'd say to myself, why do you give a damn what he's doing? It's really none of your business. But I really cared about him. And I just thought it was a shame that he was doing all this stuff, and that he deserved better for himself, that he should think more of himself. So at that point, it was working, but it wasn't like I'm gay. I thought some woman was going to come along and snap her fingers and I was going to be different. I mean, that I was really wanting, I wondered why I wasn't horny with women, and my sexual life was very selfish. It was not a thing I shared. It was something that happened for me. As bluntly as I could put it, I was the one that was really selfish and not sharing. And I was critical for Al because he was doing that with everybody. But mine was anonymous, nothing I'm really proud of, and so. But I thought it was going to go away. That this was just something to satisfy me until the right woman came along and snapped her fingers and changed my whole course. And I was going to get married and have a family. But then after the experience on the job interview, I was rudely awakened, and it wasn't all that bad. I mean, because I was sharing, and it was something that I had not done before, and it was magnificent to me. That was a change, and that was when I thought, well, this isn't all so bad, but I'm still maybe not going to do this all my life. And then all of a sudden I realized there's nothing in it. Fortunately, I never yielded to the pressure just to get married, which a lot of my friends did, and most of them have had complicated lives in a different way. They have families that some of them had to give up their children and of course their wives. And so I'm glad that I never did that to somebody else. I think that's really sad, and I think, some people bounce back from that quite easy, and both the male and female of a couple are able to handle it. I still think that's sad that you have to go through that. One of the things I sometimes feel bad about is that I had some of the females friends I knew really cared about me more than a friend, and very few of them did I ever tell. I just maintained a friendship that was close, but not it wasn't intimate. So I didn't think it was necessary to, today I would. I mean, I still have a lot of women friends, but I just like to have lunch with the gals, and just as much as, but they know me.
So when you went to Ohio University, how did you know where to go to meet these other gay people?
Well, I want to answer that, but I'm not sure how to do it. I didn't meet that many people in Athens, I'll tell you that. The only one that I never had true sexual experience. I had the one guy that cruised me in the restroom. That was the one that had winked at me, and all of a sudden I realized who he was, and I just nearly flipped because I just thought it was a friendly wink, and I had no idea that. Now there at that point I was like, am I flattered or am I angry? I did. The sexual experiences I had were most of them were illicit. What's illicit the term I want to use? Or not? There were meetings. I wasn't interested in knowing a gay person. Let's go that route. I wanted what was going to happen to me, but I didn't want to ever see the person again.
But probably not unusual for that time.
I wanted the personal satisfaction and gratification, but I didn't want any of the responsibilities that went along with it.
What was the name of that first bar that you went into in Dayton? Do you remember that?
Stage door.
And you your going there was completely accidental?
Oh, yeah.
You had no clue what you were walking into?
I had gotten a ride to Dayton with a couple of women from school, and they were going home, so they said I could ride there. And then I had to get on a bus the next day to go to Lebanon. I decided to go out and get a drink, and ended up in a gay bar. I wasn't looking for it. And like I said, this is what I was talking about. And then the gentleman next to me started talking to me and approached me and asked me if I had someplace to go. And I said yes. And we did. He had no idea. I'm sure that was my first experience.
Then you went to Lebanon and you interviewed for what job?
I started as a general assignment at a reporter photographer.
All right. And you were there for 2 years?
2 years before I went to the service. I returned there, came back as a news editor. Then I left for 1 year. I did go up to Ashland, Ohio. And I had a really good job up there. It was a nice newspaper and great people to work with. But the guy that I worked for, the managing editor, walked out from the paper where I had been. And so the editor at that time called me and said, would you come back? And I thought, well, yeah, I'll do it. So I went back. It was a nice promotion. And I had gotten a lot of good experience at Ashland in just a year's time. And Ashland was an interesting town gay-wise. It was stone dead.
It was what?
Stone dead. I did not meet one gay person in Ashland, Ohio. There had been a big park scandal in Mansfield, Ohio. And everybody was in the closet.
What can you tell me about the park scandal?
Well, it happened before I got to that area, but I think there were pictures were taken, there were recordings made, and there were a ton of arrests. And people's lives, again, were demolished. You know, with my service experience, I imagine a lot of those guys went on and were able to overcome things, but I just can't imagine how many of them might have had their lives completely ruined at that point and maybe never recovered. Because they would take them once they had confessed, or whatever you want to call it, or acknowledged their sexuality, they were in a mental institution until they left the base. And back then, when you went for a job, that's one of the things if you've been in the service, you had to have the honorable discharge.
When you were talking before about Lebanon and what happened around in that time period, you mentioned about how you did some traveling between Cincinnati and Dayton and Columbus, or through Columbus.
Yeah. Every place I've lived or worked. My first career was newspaper business, and that lasted basically 10 years. And in Ashland, I would come through Columbus to go home. From Lebanon, I would come through Columbus to go home. And then when I went to work for the telephone company in public affairs in Marion, come through Columbus to go home. Lived in Portsmouth, come through Columbus to go home. So Columbus was basically my second hometown.
Prior to when you moved here in the early 70s, did you participate in any of the gay life here in Columbus? Did you know other gay people that were here, or were you aware of gay activities that were here, even if you didn't participate in them?
I didn't participate that much until I met Richard. He had a lot of friends. So I met a lot of people during that time period, and people in all parts of town. So my oldest friend is a result of that experience. He lives out of Buckeye Lake now. But Richard was not interested in bars, though he liked to drink. He didn't want to do it in the bars. I've seen great changes in Columbus gay life. Maybe when I was with the telephone company, I became quite active in business communicators group here in Columbus. And I was president of that. And so I was in Columbus at least once a month. Even when Richard and I were living together, and after those meetings, I would usually stop at a bar.
And what time period would have that been?
It was in '69, and I moved to Marion, and that's when my relationship with Richard began. That's when I became acquainted with people, basically, as friends here in Columbus, that is.
I just want to ask you a couple of questions about your time in San Antonio.
Yes.
We talked about that a little bit already. When you entered into the service, you were in what branch?
The U.S. Army.
Okay. And you were drafted into the service,
yes.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what year was it that you were drafted?
That would have been 1963.
Okay.
When I got out in 64.
All right.
Or no, that's not enough time. I was in Lebanon 2 years before. It was full 2 years, about 18 months actually in San Antonio. So went into Fort Knox first, and then was stationed in San Antonio. And I did get out of there in 64.
And was 2 years the normal period of service for when you're drafted?
For draftees.
All right.
There was no conflict. I was in between the Korean War and the Vietnam was underway because Fort Sam was a burn unit for the Army was located at Fort Sam Houston at Brooke General Hospital. And so we knew we had all these burn patients coming back from Vietnam when we were at Pfizer's. Long before I left Fort Sam Houston.
What jobs or positions did you hold while you were in the military for those 2 years?
I was an information specialist. That's, just the different levels of that.
All right, and what was the function of that?
Troop information. I had to make presentations on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And all base personnel had to attend one of those sessions. I would get films from the service, from headquarters to show. I'd have to bring in programs on safety sometimes. Just an odd collection of things. And then give capsules in the news.
All right. How was it that this investigation got started? What triggered the beginning of this, as you know?
Well, as I understand it, I don't know if this young man got caught or just whether he turned himself in or what, but I understand this one person who knew and had been very promiscuous and knew a lot of people, just made a list. And then as they call people when the list grew, and hence I think that's which I didn't know the guy. I think that's how I got one. And then my friend from the barracks, when they let him out of interrogation after they agreed to be discharged, or whatever you would call that, after he'd been put out basically, he called the office where I worked. And of course they were right on that, like that, and then my boss got the call.
So you think how you became a part of this was because your friend called you, and so then they thought that somehow you were interconnected in this web?
I'm sure he had talked about me.
Okay.
And then there was another guy also in that same barracks that had worked at the mental health unit, hospital, I guess you'd call it, there on the base. And he he resigned. I'm not sure what terminology he used. I don't think he was put out. I think he agreed to say, I'm leaving. But in the process, you just don't do that. You have to explain why who you know and that sort of thing. So I'm just sure the list grew.
And your first notice of this was when your boss told you that somebody was going to be coming to speak with you?
My first notice, yes. Yeah, because Bob had called and told me that he had been interrogated and he was going to be discharged and that he was at the mental unit. And then my boss told me that CID, it's the Criminal Investigation Division, the Army, was the one that did the investigation. And when they came, I got in the car and then they took me that part of the base I'd never been on, and went into the building and did the interrogation. And when we came out, and after it came back, and I think there were 2 trips there. They came back and we went through my stuff in my locker in front of the other guys, and then we went back. Sure. Then we came back and they dropped me off. And he said, "We'll get you little queer."
How much time was there in between your boss telling you somebody was coming and them actually showing up?
I'm not sure, but it seemed like instant.
I think it was the same day?
Oh, yeah.
All right. How long did this, you think maybe there were 2 interviews?
It all happened within a day's time.
All right. How long did these interviews last?
They were intense. I would say the first one was probably about 3 hours.
Have you ever been subjected to any kind of questioning like that before in any circumstance?
Never.
How many people were questioning you?
Never. 2 that I could see.
And they were like police or?
No, they were plainclothes people.
Okay.
They were not military.
What sorts of questions were they asking you?
Well, I think we're trying to have. They started out by talking about Tom, the wrong Tom, and did you ever go to bed with him, and things like that, or have you ever had sex with him? And I said, no, I just know him. My God, I work at the hospital with him, and a couple of times he was a handsome guy. He really was, and he had this convertible, and he would stop and pick me up when I was walking. My office was like a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile from the hospital where the general's office was. So those were the only times I ever saw Tom. We met. How did we meet? I think we met through my Tom, and it was very casual. And it was just like he introduced me. He didn't say anything about me being gay I didn't, But there again, you have that feeling, And then they would see me on the base, and he would pick me up and drive me to the hospital. Pulled me up in front of the hospital, let me out. The whole world could see it. There was nothing wrong with that, And we would chat on at that time, and that's it. They never got to. It was most of the questions were the type that involved somebody else, and but I don't know what I would have done if they had said the real Tom. If they given his last name, what I would have done. And my Tom had given me a lighter. Well, ironically, it was identical to the lighter they gave me when I left the newspaper going in service. But they said, "Did he ever give you anything?" I said, "Yes, a lighter." Now, wait. Obviously, this is very painful, but that was when I was getting out. That's when I was leaving the car. this was not a part of the official thing down at he said, did Tom give you a lighter? And I said, yes, just like the one from I don't know why I did that, but then he concluded basically, I said, we'll get you a little quicker.
And at this point, they took you back to the barracks and searched through all your belongings?
No, that was between down there, back to the barracks, down there, back, and let me off. Let me out of the car.
When they searched your things at the barracks, there were other people there in the barracks?
Oh, yeah.
What were they saying while they were doing this?
There weren't, you mean the other people in the barracks?
No, the two interrogators are
They'd say,
the investigators.
I had pictures of the family, and I had to tell them who each picture was, who the person was. They read letters.
How long did this last?
It was long enough for them to go through. You know, the footlocker was maybe as big as this coffee table, and it was had most of the clothes in it. I wasn't a big one for keeping letters and things, and definitely not deep.
Fortunately.
Yeah. You know.
So after they interviewed you, checked your property, took you back, talked to you some more, and dropped you off, how did you know at some point that the investigation of you was over or completed?
That darn lies the big. I didn't know, and I didn't know what was on my record.
You never heard from them again?
No. But I kept my nose clean. I mean, I had those friends, and they would meet me. They would tell me, I would call them on a payphone, and they would say, "It's such and such a place," and they would pick me up, and I would go with them and spend time with them. Or I'd have been bananas.
At what point in your military career did this investigation take place? If you were in for about 2 years.
Yeah, we've probably been at the end of probably been there about a year and a half. I had about 6 months to go, I think.
After all this happened, did anyone say anything to you about it? Any of your barracks mates or your boss or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had the guy that worked next to me in the office. It was the cleric. And we always had fun. And he said, "You're going to have to pick better boyfriends to hang out with." He would razz the hell out of me. He did, all constantly. But between me, there was DeVito, and then there was me, then there was a sergeant over the unit, and then there was my boss, the colonel. And the sergeant never aware. Thank God he was gone that day. DeVito would just, whenever he get a chance, he would say, "You are a pretty good looking guy." And he was as great as an arrow. He just loved to tease me. And we had he was a salvation too, because he was like that. And he wasn't going to feel sorry for me. You know, he kept me sane that way. And the guys in the barracks, I was put in charge of the barracks. I was a barrack sergeant. And the only problem I ever had in there was involved with of a racial type. It had nothing to do with my sexuality. The guy was playing with a knife, and he pointed at me, and I said, "No, no, no. If you point that thing, you better mean it." I had to write him up. That's the only thing.
How many people were discharged or resigned or?
So I don't really know the total of that. I would say I knew or had heard of at least 15 to 20, but I think that's much bigger than that. I think it would even spread over to the Air Force, because the bases are right there. And people, I didn't know many people in the Air Force, but some of the guys did.
And you said something before too. You said that people just disappeared.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, they were not. You never saw them on the base again. They left. They weren't given a chance to go by and say goodbye or anything.
So once somebody was a confirmed homosexual,
they were removed from the service.
And in the short term, they were placed at the mental hospital?
Yeah. Until they were discharged. At least the two that I knew real well, that was the case. In fact, I don't remember how Bob's clothing and stuff left the barracks. I did not see that, but he never came back to the barracks himself. And Tom was gone overnight too. And he had an apartment. The officers' quarters were furnished.
These days, a lot of people talk about when they came out of the closet, or they have some sort of a story about the first person they came out to. Do you remember the first person who wasn't gay that you talked with about your attraction to men?
Doesn't stand out now. The locker room talk between straight guys. I never found that I always felt that very annoying. And I just am not one that really likes to talk about sex.
You mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead.
In some ways, it's just confirmed by the way I talk about maybe like Steve or something. It's not, I don't say to somebody I'm gay, but I know that one time I did come out to a woman I used to work for, long after that, and through an email. And I decided that, and she knew my first partner and had worked with him on committees and stuff like that in Marion at the technical school and at Indiana State too, but I never heard from her again. So that was a real disappointment. I invited her to come see us and that sort of stuff. There was no response.
You mentioned before when you were talking about Columbus bars that the police sometimes created problems or would harass people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any specific stories about either you heard about people having problems or you knew people who had problems with the police?
I never had any, no. Give me specifics. One time I was in the grotto when they came in and cleared it. I can't remember that was the new one or the old one, because there were too many people in there. And they just, it didn't feel bad. It wasn't that uncomfortable. They just, they just said, you have to leave. And I think they were probably given some kind of a warning or something, but we didn't, everybody just left. I know I can't remember specifics, but I just know that just hearing from other people, basically.
Were there
anybody that was really ever hurt or annoyed by the police, or as among my friends?
Were there any precautions that people took when they went to bars, parking in a special place, or you mentioned before going in the back door, or somebody told me at a prior interview that I did that there was a bar located out near the fairgrounds, and there was like when you first walked in the door, there was a small area, and then you had to go through a second door to actually get into the bar. And the reason for that was if the police came in, they would flip a light or whatever to let people know on the inside of the bar that the police were there, so people would like take a seat or stop dancing or
I've heard that story
or whatever there might be.
Yeah, I never experienced that, although I do remember that bar, just vaguely. That's probably one of my one-time visits places. I've done that. Yeah. But the bar where I met Steve was in Huntington, West Virginia. And I had to stand on the street until they decided to let me in. And with all those cars passing by, I was not comfortable. But I went back. Thank goodness.
As far as the gay scene here in Columbus, did men and women mix, the gays and the lesbians?
Now, my first long-term partner had female friends, but I never met them. After they were like from a previous relationship he had, and I never was really introduced to him. But he did have a lot of women friends.
Did men and women go to the same bars? Did you?
Very unusual. I remember, in fact, first time I saw a woman in TW2, I was surprised. And that has been all that long ago. I'd say, well, maybe 15, 16 years.
When you were first checking out the clubs here in Columbus, were the clubs racially integrated? I mean, did black and white people go to the same places? Do you recall?
I'd have to say no, I don't know for sure. I don't know. I don't remember any great number of racial mix.
You mentioned earlier the police sting up in Mansfield, where maybe some people in a restroom were arrested. Do you recall anything like that happening in Columbus or other sorts of controversies?
I've read it in the Christian Dispatch recently. Has carried some of those type of articles, and I have a friend that always talks about the rest stop on Route 33 South towards Lancaster, about how active it is. He used to say, I don't know how much of this is true. He said that there was so much activity there that they had to have a spot marked reserved for the State Highway Patrol. That might be a slight exaggeration. And they would come in to check. And that was pretty devastating at the time. I understand that there were a lot of, married men, professional men whose lives were pretty much demolished by that or hurt.
Today, there's a lot of gay clubs and organizations, softball, volleyball, bowling, all kinds of things. Did gay people do those sorts of social activities years ago?
No, not in the areas where I lived. There were clubs, was it the Manchin Society, but not in Ohio. No. The ones that were probably very small and exclusive, formed by a group of people who just knew each other, and I think that's how a lot of things evolve, cliques, if you will. I grow, and you would see the same people a lot of times. Like in Cincinnati, where I would go to, I would always look forward to seeing people there. And I'm sure that as things evolved, those people had social events that they, it's just, fortunately it has evolved. And the young people today are very fortunate. While there are a lot of things that still threaten the gay community, and we're not fully equal. We definitely have come a long way. And I just, for the ones who don't understand it, I hope they never have to experience, going back in or going into a closet. I was not a person who around with a badge on my, definitely saying I'm gay, but in my own way, I think I helped contribute as a community leader, just involved like in the newspaper and so forth. I did not tolerate people making slurs or whatnot. I was very obviously become offended and would say so. Now, whether they put two and two together, I don't care, but, I didn't know. It's just like racial slur. I mean, I didn't tolerate that from my friends or associates or people either.
Do you remember any specific instances related to newspaper reporting where people were wanting to do things that you thought were bigoted?
You mean in terms of the gay side?
Yeah.
No.
Did you ever cover any gay stories? Even like somebody being arrested or somebody in trouble?
No. My only run-in was with the Ku Klux Klan. I thought I should put their meeting notices. I had a personal incident with a gay person he was from a well-to-do family in the city. He was very active in the historical society, and he would come to the office and he wouldn't talk to anybody but me. Well, I got a lot of harassment for that. Jerry's here to see you, Dave.
That's funny. When you were living in Ohio after college, were there any gay publications, newsletters, or were there any books that were out at that time that you read?
Well, yeah, I would see articles once in a while. In the Kinsey, like things from the Kinsey Report, but I didn't see. I don't know when the first gay publication I saw was. Probably here in Columbus after. Did you know what the first one was here? I probably picked it up right away when it came out, but
I think there was an organization on campus at OSU called the Gay Activist Alliance, and I think they may have published a newsletter sporadically back in the 70s.
I didn't see that.
So, and at some point in time, although it's not exactly clear to me when it began, there was a publication called Gay Beat that was kind of like distributed in the bars.
That sounds familiar. And that's where the first distribution things. I think there was one so that you could have mailed. I know I was always picking them up when I saw things in the bars. A lot of times it first started out more or less advertisement type things and not much real substance. So I'm kind of anxious about Outlook to see what happens to it. Do you know the new owners?
I've met him before.
Have you? It seems to be doing okay now, but I just wondered if they were continuing in the direction. I thought that was quite an improvement.